The lemonade glass was still sweating in my hand when my daughter-in-law called me worthless, in front of my son, my guests, and God. Still, I didn't argue. I just reached for the folder under the patio table, like I'd planned this moment for years. As the condensation traced my wrist, the silence grew louder than her insult ever could. The same chill from the glass now lived in my spine, steady, final, unmoved. That's when I turned, laid the deed on the table, and watched her smile die mid-sip. I didn't need to raise my voice. My name was already raised in ink. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The late afternoon sun spilled across Mildred's backyard like warm syrup, coating the lawn in gold. Kids tore through the grass, shrieking with summer joy, while the adults congregated near the grill, sipping hard seltzers and iced bourbon, pretending they weren't clocking each other's aging faces and waistlines. A Bluetooth speaker near the patio hummed classic rock, just loud enough to discourage real conversation. Mildred had timed everything to perfection. Charcoal lit by 4:30, ribs rubbed and resting by noon, deviled eggs covered and chilled, potato salad made the night before. Her husband, Greg, manned the grill with that open-shirt bravado he always adopted when company came around, spatula in one hand, beer in the other. Her daughter, Sadie, was off somewhere near the fence line with her cousins, barefoot and sticky with popsicle juice. Laura stood near the drinks table, swirling ice in her cup, eyes scanning like a hawk through aviator sunglasses. Mildred's sister-in-law had that polished Westchester sheen, every strand of hair perfectly trained, her tank top white as snow, not a spot of grease on her from the 6-hour drive. The kind of woman who made a backyard barbecue feel like a stage for quiet humiliation. "You always do this dressing on the potato salad?" Laura asked, just loud enough for the people closest to turn an ear. Mildred turned from the tray she was refilling. "Yep, Dijon, apple cider vinegar, smoked paprika, same as every year." Laura smiled thinly. "It's very rustic." Greg chuckled too quickly, and someone behind Laura pretended to cough into a laugh. Mildred's fingers tightened around the tray. "I'll grab more ice," she said lightly, stepping away before the heat in her cheeks climbed any higher. She walked past the patio doors and into the kitchen, letting the cool air wrap around her like armor. She opened the freezer, dug for the backup bag of ice, and paused when she heard voices drifting from the open back window. "I mean, God, it's just sad," Laura's voice floated through, lower now, bitter like oversteeped tea. "She clings to this house like it's her badge of honor. Newsflash, Greg's the only reason she's still here." A second voice laughed. Kim, Greg's cousin. "She's lucky he didn't leave her. You know he could do better." "I give it 2 years," Laura replied. "She's just dead weight, hanging on because she's got nowhere else to go." Mildred stood perfectly still. The condensation from the ice bag dripped onto her bare foot, but she didn't flinch. The window was open on purpose. She'd left it that way so she could hear Sadie if anything went wrong outside. Now it was her heart that threatened to go wrong. She walked back out into the sunlight with the ice bag hugged to her chest, like it might cool the fire licking at her ribs. Laura turned and smiled that Stepford smile again, raising her glass. "You were gone forever," she said, her voice syrupy now. "Did you have to grow the ice yourself?" Mildred dropped the bag into the cooler without a word. She turned to check the grill, but Greg was already plating the ribs, oblivious as usual. That's when Laura leaned in, voice dropping but sharp enough to slice skin. "You know you're just here out of pity, right?" Mildred turned slowly. "Excuse me?" Laura's smile dropped. "Don't play innocent. Everyone knows you don't belong here anymore. You're a placeholder. This house, this party, none of it's yours. Not really." Mildred didn't blink. "I planned this party, cooked half the food, bought the damn ice." Laura let out a bark of a laugh. "Oh, honey, please. You don't even own this anymore. Greg does. You're just hanging on by your fingernails, hoping nobody kicks you out." The yard around them kept humming, kids screaming, music playing, someone cracking a beer. But Mildred's world went silent. She felt the heat crawling up her neck again, but this time she didn't retreat. She stared into Laura's eyes, searching for the source of that venom, that need to peel her open in front of everyone. And for once, she didn't find fear inside herself. "I think," Mildred said softly, too softly for anyone else to hear, "you should leave the potato salad critiques to people who cook. And maybe ask yourself why you're so desperate to tear someone else down. Is it boredom? Or does your life feel that small?" Lara's eyes flared, just for a second. But she turned away with a scoff, retreating toward the cooler as if it had something worth chewing on. Mildred exhaled and walked to the grill. Her hands didn't shake as she picked up the tongs, but somewhere deep inside, something had changed shape. Something that wasn't going to change back. The folding chair let out a quiet groan as Mildred sat down at the edge of the deck. She rested her palms flat against her thighs, trying to feel the weight of herself, to remember that she was still here, still solid. Her gaze flicked to the patio table where condensation rings had formed beneath untouched glasses of lemonade, and then to the folder resting on the seat beside her. Manila, scuffed, ordinary looking, but it was anything but. She waited. Let the music buzz a little longer. Watched as someone's kid knocked over a cup and squealed when the ice touched bare legs. Greg was laughing at something his brother said near the grill, face pink and shiny with beer and heat. Lara, back by the cooler, was dabbing her temple with a cocktail napkin, still riding the high of her verbal victory, her eyes flicking sideways now and then, just in case Mildred was looking. She was. Mildred stood. She moved slowly, deliberately, every step deliberate, as she walked to the center table, where paper plates sat piled beside a sweating pitcher of sangria. Conversations didn't stop, but they stuttered. Enough people had heard the earlier exchange to sense that something was about to happen. She set the folder down on the table. The thump was soft, but final. Greg turned toward her with a lazy grin. "You okay, babe?" "I'm good," Mildred said, without looking at him. She opened the folder slowly, the way someone might open a letter bomb, controlled, steady, already familiar with what was inside. First came the deed. Original copy, blue ink on parchment-toned paper. The notary stamp still raised. Mildred's name, only her name, typed clearly on the second line, just below the parcel number and legal description. Next came the transfer document, dated 15 years ago, signed by her late father, witnessed, filed, recorded. She slid the sheets apart like dealing cards and turned them to face outward. Nobody spoke. A bee buzzed low near the soda cans. The music clicked to the next song, Bob Sager this time, but even he couldn't cut through the stillness that followed. Mildred looked up and scanned the faces around the deck, some puzzled, some wide-eyed, some pretending they hadn't been eavesdropping earlier. Then she found Lara, who had frozen mid-sip, mouth barely parted around her straw. Mildred's voice was low, but it carried. "Worthless people don't hold title," Greg blinked. "Wait, what's—" But Lara was already moving. She slapped her cup down, too hard, and stormed toward the house, heels crunching against the gravel path, the screen door snapping shut behind her with a crack. A couple of heads turned. Adam, Mildred's adult stepson, stood near the grill, caught in no man's land with a rib in his hand and nothing to say. He stared down at the concrete like it held answers. Mildred didn't look away. She left the folder open on the table and sat back down, hands folded neatly in her lap. Greg still hadn't moved. Behind him, Greg's cousin Kim was whispering something to her husband with a face like she'd just witnessed someone pee in the pool. Kelsey, 12, sharp-eyed, smarter than she let on, had drifted over during the quiet. She stood just behind her mother's empty chair, arms folded tight over her chest. Her eyes flicked to the folder, then to Mildred. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she whispered. The words sliced deeper than any of Lara's insults. Mildred turned her head. "You didn't do anything wrong, baby." Kelsey nodded once, but her lip was trembling. Somewhere inside. The screen door creaked again, and footsteps echoed, fast and erratic. Cabinet slammed. Lara's voice, distant but unmistakably high-pitched, rose in sharp bursts behind the glass. Greg started to move toward the house but stopped, caught between instinct and confusion. Mildred watched him freeze again. She could almost feel it, the shift, the reordering of the social gravity around her. She wasn't just the hostess anymore. She wasn't the invisible one, the charity case, the leftover wife who didn't know when to quit. She was the woman with the deed. The room, if you could call a sun-bleached patio full of folding chairs a room, had indeed been shut down, and she hadn't raised her voice once. 2 days passed. The folder still sat on the kitchen counter, slightly warped from moisture where someone had carelessly set a glass too close. Mildred hadn't moved it. She wanted everyone to see it, walk past it, choose to ignore it. Laura never came out of her room that night. She'd slammed the door upstairs around 7:40 and didn't come down even when the guests left, murmuring vague goodbyes, not quite making eye contact with anyone. Not even Greg. Adam hadn't said a word since. Not then, not after. Not even a lukewarm hey when he crossed paths with her in the hallway the next morning. The silence hung heavy in the house. Not loud, not confrontational, just thick, like a wool blanket soaked through and tossed over everything. Even Kelsey was quieter. The child moved through rooms like she didn't want to disturb something, and Mildred waited. She thought maybe, Laura would knock on the bedroom door with a shaky apology. That Adam would try to explain why he'd said nothing while his mother insulted the woman who cooked him dinner 4 nights a week. That Greg would, for once, act like a man with a spine. But nothing came. No explanation. No regret. Not even a look. By Tuesday morning, Mildred had stopped expecting it. She stood by the sink, rinsing the coffee pot with one hand, the other resting on the counter near the folder, when Evelyn called. Her voice came through the phone speaker in that clipped, razor-clean tone she always used when she smelled bullshit. "Well?" Evelyn asked. "They're still here," Mildred said, "but not really here, you know." "Of course," Evelyn replied, "because silence is an answer, and theirs was loud." Mildred set the coffee pot down and leaned against the counter. "I thought Adam would say something." "No." "You hoped he would," Evelyn corrected gently. "Big difference." A long breath passed between them. Mildred stared at the humming refrigerator, its whir sounding like static in a radio. She could see Laura's suitcase in her mind, still by the guest room door, still zipped shut, like she was waiting to be asked to leave. Mildred was done waiting. "I need to call Samuel." Evelyn didn't ask why, just said, "Good." Samuel's office hadn't changed in 15 years. The same faux leather chairs, the same ticking wall clock with a second hand that always seemed a little too fast. He wore readers now, which made Mildred feel less old and more like time had been fair to them both. She sat across from him, back straight. No folder in hand this time, just the decision already sealed inside her. "How fast can I reclaim occupancy?" she asked, her voice flat but steady. Samuel took off his glasses and folded them neatly. "You never lost it. It's your home, Mildred. You allowed them residence. You can revoke it." Mildred's jaw flexed once. "Then I revoke it." He blinked. "Understood." She leaned back. The relief didn't come right away. It wasn't fireworks or glass breaking. It was slow, like pressure easing from a bad joint. She hadn't realized how long she'd been holding her breath inside her own house. 30-day notice, he asked, already pulling a legal pad toward him. "Yes," she said, then paused. "No drama, no cruelty, just clarity." Samuel nodded. "I'll draft it up. Clean, firm, enforceable." Mildred watched the pen start moving across the yellow pad, his handwriting the same neat block letters it had always been. She wondered if Laura would rip it up the moment she saw it, if Adam would finally look her in the eye, if Greg would even notice or just keep watching his phone, waiting for someone else to fix it all. She didn't care anymore. That was the power. It wasn't about hurting them. It was about cutting the line between her life and their weight. She picked up her purse and stood. "Email me a copy." Samuel looked up. "Of course." She nodded once, then turned and left the office. Outside, the air was crisp for October. Dry leaves skated along the sidewalk. Mildred didn't stop to check her phone. She didn't look back. She already knew what her next move was, and this time, no one in that house would be ready for it. The coffee shop was half empty, washed in pale November light and the smell of cinnamon syrup and scorched espresso. A jazz instrumental hummed through overhead speakers, clashing slightly with the hiss of steaming milk behind the counter. Mildred sat at a corner table by the window, her coat draped neatly over the back of the chair. She'd arrived early. Of course she had. She wanted to see Laura walk in. wanted to watch the performance begin before a single word was spoken. Lara entered 5 minutes late, wearing black sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. Her coat, camel wool, tailored sharp, hung open like she needed everyone to see her outfit. She spotted Mildred, exhaled theatrically, and walked over. No greeting, just sat down, crossed her legs, and placed her phone on the table like a threat. "You embarrassed us," Lara said, skipping straight past pleasantries. "Over paperwork?" Mildred blinked. "I clarified the truth, quietly. You pulled out a folder like it was a courtroom, at a cookout, in front of family." Mildred leaned slightly forward. "You chose volume, I chose proof." Lara's jaw clenched. She leaned back in the chair, removing her sunglasses. Her eyes were tired, rimmed red. Whether from lack of sleep or humiliation, Mildred couldn't tell, didn't care. "You act like we're strangers, like I haven't helped raise your granddaughter, like we haven't made that house livable." "No," Mildred said. "You made yourselves comfortable. That's not the same thing." Lara's voice sharpened. "We built that house into a home." "No, Lara, I built that house into a home. You just put your name on the guest Wi-Fi." That landed. For a moment, Lara looked stunned. Not because she didn't expect a clapback, but because it was surgical. Mildred wasn't angry, she wasn't shaking, she wasn't baiting, she was simply finished. "Do you honestly think this is justice?" Lara asked, quieter now. "Evicting your own family over what? Ego?" Mildred reached into her handbag, pulled out a crisp envelope, and set it on the table between them. Lara stared at it like it might explode. "What is that?" "Clarity," Mildred said. Lara didn't reach for it. Mildred pushed it closer with 2 fingers, gently, as if she were nudging a chess piece. 30 days, legally filed, delivered in person." Lara laughed, sharp and joyless. "You're kicking us out. I'm returning the house to peace." "You think you'll feel better once we're gone?" Lara said. "Once that place is empty again?" "It won't be empty," Mildred said. "It'll be mine, fully, quietly, without someone whispering over holiday dishes that I'm worthless." Lara flinched, just a fraction. "You always thought you were better than me." "No," Mildred said, sipping her coffee. "You just always hated that I never needed you to be worse." That silence came again. The kind that sucks the sound out of a room, out of your ribs. Lara stared at the notice, then looked up at the street, watching a man in a puffy jacket walk his dog past the window. She stood abruptly. "You're a bitter woman." "No," Mildred said. "I'm a woman who's done pretending." Lara grabbed her phone. "We'll see about this. You've got 28 days left to see." Mildred's voice was still calm. "I'd spend them packing, not scheming." Lara walked off without another word, shoulders stiff, heels clacking. She didn't throw the envelope away. She didn't touch her coffee. Mildred stayed seated, letting the jazz hum back into her ears. She took another sip, and this time, she actually tasted it. Bitterness, yes, but something warm beneath it too. Satisfaction. Outside, the sky had cleared just enough to let a hard slant of sunlight cut through the glass and land across the table. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She opened a new note. To do, change the locks, update will, replace stained carpet in guest room. She stared at the last line, then backspaced it. New reading nook, paint walls soft green. She smiled. The diner smelled like old coffee and disinfectant. A bell jingled when Mildred walked in, though no one looked up. The morning rush had passed, leaving only a few truckers hunched over pancakes and a waitress wiping down syrup rings with a rag that had seen better years. Adam sat in a booth near the window. His head was bowed, hands clasped loosely in front of him, a coffee cooling untouched between them. He looked smaller than she remembered, shoulders slumped, eyes dulled. The spark he used to have around Kelsey dimmed out. The same man who once filled rooms with easy laughter now looked like someone waiting for a verdict. "Hey," he said without standing. Mildred slid into the opposite seat. "Hey." The waitress came by and poured her coffee without asking. Mildred gave a polite nod. Adam mumbled a thank you but didn't meet her eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. The low hum of the old refrigerator filled the silence. Outside, a delivery truck hissed to a stop, the air brakes sounding like a long sigh. Finally, Adam exhaled. Can't we just move past this? Mildred stirred a packet of sugar into her coffee. I already did, she said evenly. The moment you said nothing. He winced. Mom. No, her voice was firm, but quiet. Not Mom, not right now. He looked down again, rubbing his palms together. You don't understand how hard this is for me. Oh, I understand perfectly, she said. You're in a hard spot. I am. He looked up finally, his voice cracking a little. She's my wife. You're my mother. You put me right in the middle. Mildred took a slow sip of coffee, eyes steady on him. So was I, she said. On my own porch. That landed heavier than she intended. Adam blinked, then leaned back in the booth, deflated. He didn't try to argue, didn't even reach for his cup. You could have said one word, she continued, softer now. Not a speech, not a defense. Just one word to tell me I wasn't alone while she was gutting me in front of everyone. But you didn't. Adam's jaw tightened. He tapped his fingers against the table, a nervous rhythm that didn't find a beat. You think I didn't want to, he muttered. You think I didn't feel sick afterward? That's guilt, Adam, she said. Not courage. He looked at her then, really looked. The wear in her face wasn't from age, but from years of being talked over, dismissed, minimized. He seemed to realize, maybe for the first time, that she wasn't angry out of pride. She was angry because she'd been erased by the very people she built her life around. I didn't want to choose sides, he said weakly. You already did, she replied. By standing still. He nodded once, more to himself than her. Lara says you're trying to punish us. Mildred gave a faint, humorless smile. I'm trying to live without feeling like a guest in my own home. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His reflection wavered in the window behind him. Half shadow, half man, caught between two worlds he'd never fully managed to own. You raised me better than this, he said quietly. I did, she agreed. And I think you know that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. He looked like he wanted to argue again, but there was no fight left in him. Only that tired slump of a man who'd run out of excuses, but still couldn't bear the consequences. I'll make sure Kelsey's okay, he said finally. I know you will, she answered. The waitress came by again, refilled her cup, and asked if they wanted anything else. Neither spoke, so she left them with a half-hearted smile and the scent of bleach trailing behind her. When Mildred finally slid out of the booth, Adam didn't move. He stared down at his coffee like it might offer an answer. She paused beside him, hand resting lightly on the edge of the table. I hope, she said softly. One day you'll understand the difference between guilt and growth. He didn't look up. Mildred left $2 under her cup and walked toward the door. The bell chimed as she stepped out into the cold. Behind her, Adam sat alone in the booth, the steam from his coffee finally gone, leaving only a thin ring of brown cooling in the cup, like something once warm that no one had bothered to save. The kitchen smelled like lemons and butter and something warm enough to almost feel like forgiveness. Outside, late autumn clung to the bare branches, the sky the soft blue of a bruise fading. The furnace hummed from the vents. A low jazz record crackled in the background. Not cheerful, not sad. Just something to keep the silence from getting too heavy. Kelsey sat at the kitchen island, sleeves rolled up, a smudge of flour on her cheek, and another on the rim of her glasses. She was separating lemon zest from rind with the concentration of a surgeon, her small hands moving slowly, methodically, as if each stroke gave her back something she'd lost. Mildred watched from the counter, weighing each ball of cookie dough before setting it on the parchment-lined tray. She hadn't asked why Kelsey had shown up after school with her backpack and a too bright, "Hey, Grandma." She didn't need to. They'd gotten straight to baking. 20 silent minutes passed before Kelsey finally spoke, her voice so soft it barely made it over the sound of the oven preheating. I hated what she said, and that he didn't say anything. Mildred paused mid-scoop. She looked over, but Kelsey was still focused on the lemons. I didn't mean to listen, the girl added quickly. But I did. I heard all of it. Mildred walked to the sink, rinsed her hands, and dried them on a dish towel before leaning against the counter. You don't have to explain for them, she said gently. I'm not, Kelsey whispered. I wanted you to know I saw it. Everything. I remember what was said. Mildred's throat caught unexpectedly. She took a sip of water, mostly to buy time. Kelsey's voice was steadier now. Can I come here after school for a while? Just to be here, not even to talk if you don't want. Mildred stepped forward and brushed a curl from her granddaughter's forehead. Any time, she said. Always. Kelsey gave a small, almost embarrassed nod, then wiped her hands on her jeans like she'd touched something too big to hold. They worked in silence for a while after that. The cookies went into the oven. The timer was set. Mildred poured 2 glasses of milk and placed them on the table without a word. When the first sweet, citrusy puff of baked dough filled the kitchen, Kelsey finally looked up. Do you still love him? She asked. It wasn't angry, it wasn't even curious. Just something she needed to know. Mildred didn't answer right away. She walked to the window, watching the maple across the street shed its last yellow leaves onto the wet sidewalk. Her hands were still dusted with flour. She rubbed them together like she was trying to erase something invisible. I love what he used to be, she said at last. What we used to be. She turned back to see Kelsey looking at her, eyes wide and open, too old for 12 and too young for what she'd had to witness. That doesn't make me weak, Mildred added. It just means I have a memory. Not all of it was bad. Kelsey nodded, but didn't smile. They stood there together until the timer beeped. Mildred took the cookies out, the golden edges crisp, the centers pale and soft. She set the tray on the stovetop to cool, the scent curling through the kitchen like comfort. Kelsey took one before they were ready, burning her fingers slightly, laughing quietly through the pain. Mildred rolled her eyes, handed her a napkin, and broke one for herself. It was too hot, too sweet, too familiar, but it was real. And it was hers. Samuel's voice didn't rise. It never did. Not when Laura's cousin, some fresh-faced paralegal from Tallahassee, called his office pretending to request clarity about Mildred's right to serve eviction. Not when the woman started peppering him with buzzwords like implied tenancy and undue hardship. Not even when she suggested this could get expensive if it escalates. Samuel had heard it all before. In 3 decades of property law, he'd seen neighbors sue over tree roots and brothers go to war over tool sheds. This wasn't his first case involving family with too much entitlement and not enough paperwork. He waited until she finished her spiel, then quietly opened a drawer and pulled out a slim folder, copies of the signed tenancy agreements, time-stamped emails confirming month-to-month arrangements, the formal written notice delivered and acknowledged. Would you like me to email these to you, Samuel asked, or directly to your supervising attorney? The line went quiet for a beat too long. Then, I'll circle back. He hung up with the same calm he used to stir sugar into his tea. The next day, Laura's Facebook lit up with passive-aggressive fireworks. Some people build their lives on bitterness and paperwork. Hope the house feels big enough without a heart inside it. 3 hours later, funny how power can make someone forget who raised their children. Followed by, but Karma's a patient girl. The posts were vague enough to avoid outright accusations, but specific enough to whip up just enough family drama. 2 cousins liked it. One aunt commented with a single broken heart emoji. Mildred didn't reply. She didn't need to. By Friday, a firm letter drafted on Samuel's legal stationery had been emailed and physically mailed to Laura. Cease and desist. Defamation. Breach of digital conduct within tenant agreement. It was clear, clean, quietly terrifying. Laura deleted the post the next morning. That weekend, Evelyn came over with a bottle of Chardonnay and a tray of spinach puffs. She tossed her coat on the hall bench and made herself at home like she always did, poking through the fridge before even offering a hello. So, you ready to drink like we're not half a decade past our prime, she called. Mildred laughed from the other room. If you bring the glasses, I'll bring the scars. By the second glass, Evelyn leaned back in the living room armchair, watching the fire crackle, the soft clink of ice melting in their drinks. You know, she said, tilting her glass, you haven't raised your voice once. Not once through this whole circus. Mildred didn't answer immediately. She just looked out the window, where dusk had started to press against the glass like a slow tide. Evelyn raised her glass and nodded in quiet approval. Your silence is the loudest thing you've ever done. Mildred clinked her glass in response. They didn't need more words than that. Later that night, Kelsey wandered into the attic, looking for a box of books Mildred had promised to donate to her school's book drive. She moved a dusty lamp, shifted a crate of Christmas lights, and found something she hadn't expected. A hardbound notebook worn at the corners with property log, written in faded gold across the front. She sat cross-legged in the dust and opened it. Inside, her grandmother's handwriting spanned decades. Notes about the house, dates of repairmen, appliance installations. But between those mundane lines, Kelsey saw something else begin to surface. Entries like July 2008. Laura called my decor sad. Didn't offer help, just judgment. Adam laughed. Thanksgiving 2012. Greg interrupted me 7 times during dinner. Kelsey asked why I was so quiet. April 2016. Spent Easter cleaning up everyone's mess. No thank yous. Just a comment that I should have made ham. The lines weren't angry, they weren't dramatic, but they were cumulative. Paper cuts over years. A lifetime of being chipped away in whispers and offhand comments no one remembered making, but she never forgot hearing. Kelsey brought the journal downstairs, face solemn. You kept all this? She asked quietly. Mildred looked up from her crossword, saw the book in her granddaughter's hands, didn't flinch. This isn't new, she said. I just stopped ignoring it. Kelsey nodded slowly. She understood more than her years allowed, but less than time would eventually reveal. She handed the journal back. Mildred didn't open it. She didn't need to. She knew what it said. And now so did the next generation. The house grew quieter with each passing day. Not peaceful, just quieter. The 30-day countdown marched on, one sunset at a time. And still there were no family dinners, no group meals at the long dining table, no Sunday breakfast casseroles or quick catch-ups over leftovers. The kitchen was no longer a shared space. It was a hallway they passed through silently. No one apologized. No one tried. Laura moved through the house with theatrical scorn, slamming doors that had never done anything wrong, dragging bins too loudly down the stairs, making sure every zipper of every suitcase echoed up the walls. She packed in bursts, an hour of chaotic clattering, followed by hours of sulking silence. Her perfume lingered in the hall like the memory of a fight. Floral and bitter and too thick to ignore. Mildred didn't rise to it. She was outside most mornings, gardening gloves pulled tight, pruning shears in hand. The front beds had been neglected too long, patches of compacted soil, dead mums tangled with grass, half-buried plastic forks where someone once tried to keep the squirrels away. She knelt with quiet focus, gloved fingers digging deep, separating root from weed. It was the kind of work no one noticed until it was done, the kind that didn't demand thanks. You're out here every day, Evelyn said, stepping out of her car one afternoon with a small wooden birdhouse tucked under one arm. I see you've chosen therapy through Flora. Mildred brushed soil from her knee. Something had to grow around here. Evelyn walked closer and held out the birdhouse, hand-painted in pale blue with white trim, like a cottage waiting for wings. For your next chapter, she said, setting it gently on the porch railing. May it house guests who actually pull their weight. Mildred smiled. Not wide, but real. They stood there for a while, watching a breeze scatter leaves across the driveway. The house behind them creaked like it was listening. Do you miss them? Evelyn asked eventually. I miss who they never were, Mildred answered. Inside, the clock ticked down. Lara stayed mostly upstairs now. Greg was a ghost who passed through on his way to nowhere in particular. Adam came by to pick up Kelsey, eyes never quite meeting Mildred's. Even Kelsey had stopped trying to bridge conversations. Sensing the futility and too much hope, still she came. Every day after school, backpack over one shoulder, an air of permission in her step now. She no longer asked. She simply arrived. They sat together most afternoons, sometimes baking, sometimes reading, sometimes just folding laundry in companionable silence, while the house exhaled around them. One Wednesday, while Mildred repotted a fern on the back porch, Kelsey leaned against the railing, her homework open on her lap. Mom's furious, she said, not looking up from the worksheet. But she knows you're serious. Mildred didn't pause her hands. Fury usually means you've lost something you thought you controlled. Kelsey squinted toward the yard. So she's scared? Probably, Mildred said, but not of me. The porch fell quiet again. A squirrel darted up the oak near the fence line, scattering leaves like confetti. Somewhere down the block, a kid called out for their dog. The air had that early December bite. Not quite snow, not yet spring. Just cold enough to remind you the year was closing. Mildred looked out over the yard, the birdhouse now hanging gently from the trellis, the flower beds combed and fresh. Even the rusted garden hose had been replaced. No more waiting for someone else to do it. No more putting off the work. She wiped her hands on a towel and sat beside her granddaughter. "Your mom will land where she lands," Mildred said softly. "Just don't let her tell you that silence equals surrender." Kelsey nodded. "I won't." They watched a crow land on the neighbor's roof, silhouetted against the evening sky. "I hope the birdhouse gets used," Kelsey said. "It already has," Mildred replied. "I put seed inside this morning." Kelsey looked at her. Mildred smiled gently. "Some of us prepare, even when it seems like no one's coming." The whispers didn't take long to find her. First it was Mrs. Carruthers from 3 doors down, pretending not to ask questions while handing Mildred a tin of brittle and slipping in a soft, "Heard things got complicated." Then it was the woman at the post office counter, squinting as she weighed Mildred's parcel and asking, "Everything okay at home?" By the weekend, the gossip had bloomed like an unchecked weed. Mildred had thrown her family out. Mildred was selling the house. Mildred was joining a cult in Vermont. She didn't reply, not once. When neighbors leaned in with sympathy dipped in sugar, she smiled kindly and changed the subject. When the cashier at the market asked if her kids were visiting for the holidays, she simply said, "Not this year. Let them talk. Truth didn't need a bullhorn." Kelsey arrived after school on Tuesday, sketchbook tucked under her arm, cheeks red from windburn. She kicked off her sneakers at the door and went straight to the back porch, where Mildred had taken to spending her afternoons pruning the rose bush to its skeletal frame. Without a word, Kelsey sat on the edge of the steps and opened her book. She started sketching, charcoal lines shaping the trellis, the rake leaning against the fence, the pots of upturned soil, waiting. "You're drawing the messiest part of the yard," Mildred teased gently, squinting into the low sun. Kelsey shrugged, eyes focused. "It's not messy, it's just not done yet." Mildred smiled, brushing dirt from her glove. "Everything blooms better after being cut back." Kelsey looked up at that, not just with her eyes, but her whole face, like a thought had finally landed somewhere solid. "Is that what you're doing?" she asked. Mildred took a breath that tasted like cold air and coming change. "Yes," she said. Inside, the house had taken on the scent of cardboard and lemon oil. Evelyn was seated cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by open boxes, bubble wrap, and a Sharpie that had already stained 3 fingers. They'd been sorting all afternoon. Keep, donate, and forget. It wasn't about moving. It was about not caring what didn't belong anymore. "You've got 4 identical fondue pots," Evelyn said, holding one up like a trophy. "Unless you're planning to open a 1970s-themed dinner theater, I vote donate." "Agreed," Mildred said from the hallway, carrying a small box of linen napkins she hadn't used since Bush was in office. They laughed quietly, the kind that came easy when the hard part was already underway. In one of the smaller boxes, Evelyn found a cufflink box, matte leather, slightly worn. She opened it. "Is this his?" Mildred nodded. They weren't flashy, just silver with a brushed finish. Initials engraved in one corner. Classic. Understated. The kind Greg used to wear when he remembered to act like the man Mildred fell for. "I was going to toss them," she admitted. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "And then what? Regret it in 15 years when Kelsey wants them for a wedding bouquet charm or something sentimental?" "No," Mildred said. "I'm giving them to Jacob." Evelyn blinked. "The kid next door?" "He's graduating this spring, wants to go into hospitality. Always holds the door open when I'm carrying groceries." She paused, eyes flicking toward the window. "Greg hasn't noticed they're missing." Evelyn closed the box carefully. "Then they already belong to someone else." That evening, Mildred stood at the edge of her bedroom, staring at a wall once covered in framed photos. Only 3 remained. The rest had been taken down and stored. Some in keep, most in forget. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Grief, she'd learned, isn't always wet. Sometimes it's a dusting, a shift in weight. She walked to the window and looked out at the garden. Kelsey had left her sketchbook open on the porch bench, a half-drawn trellis, empty, but waiting. Mildred turned from the glass and walked toward the bed. She didn't close the blinds, let them look in if they wanted. She had nothing left to defend. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It breathed. It shifted with the wood of the floors. It held light differently in the corners, now that nothing and no one was looming in them. The house had the same bones, the same paint, the same floor creaks, but it echoed differently, not with absence, with clarity. Mildred walked barefoot down the upstairs hallway, pausing in each room. Lara's former guest room was stripped to the frame, mattress gone, walls bare. She opened the window and let the late winter air in, sharp and real. The room didn't smell like her anymore. It didn't smell like anything. By noon, she had new curtains up, linen ones, soft sage green. She spread fresh linens across the bed she'd moved from the attic, shook out a new throw blanket across the footboard, and stepped back to see if the light landed right. It did. Not perfect, but peaceful. She changed every bulb in the hallway to warm white, tucked cedar sachets into the dresser drawers, opened the windows in the den for the first time in over a year. The air rolled in like the house itself had been waiting for permission. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. Samuel stood on the porch in his corduroy blazer, briefcase in one hand, a paper bag in the other. He handed her the bag first. "Lemon loaf," he said. "Still warm?" Mildred took it with a smile. "You spoil me." "I work for baked goods and quiet clients," he replied, stepping inside. At the dining table, he unzipped the briefcase and slid a new folder across to her. "Updated trust documents," he said. "New distributions per your request. House in trust. Liquid assets shifted to protect generational transfers." Mildred scanned the paperwork. "The scholarship fund?" "Filed this morning," he confirmed. "Discretionary. Kelsey's the first beneficiary." She blinked, holding his gaze for a second too long, then lowered her eyes back to the documents. "She wants to go into design," she murmured. "I want to make sure nobody ever tells her to shrink herself just to stay in a room." Samuel nodded. "She won't have to." He stayed for one slice of loaf and a quick rundown of what the market was doing before heading out. Mildred walked him to the door, then stood for a while, hand resting on the knob, watching the street go still again. For the first time in months, she had no idea who might visit next. And that didn't scare her. Evelyn arrived an hour later with a truck full of throw pillows, a new reading lamp, and 100 unsolicited opinions. "You've got to move that chair," she said, pointing to the oversized recliner Greg had insisted on keeping. "It's giving retired dentist meets hostage furniture." They pushed and rearranged until the room opened up. Mildred brought down a smaller armchair from the spare room upstairs, one with soft gray fabric and a curved back that made it easy to settle into. They positioned it near the front window, angled to catch the afternoon sun. "There," Evelyn said, stepping back. "Your new spot." Mildred sat down slowly, the chair cradling her body like it had been waiting. She looked out the window and realized the maple tree was already budding. That night, she sat alone in the new chair with a journal across her lap. The same hardbound kind she used to log every slight. But this one was clean. Unmarked, she opened to the first page, wrote the date, then, "Worthless isn't on the deed." She stared at the sentence for a long moment, then underlined it, once, firmly. Somewhere in the house, the heater kicked on. The ducks rumbled gently, like the bones of the place sighing in relief. She didn't need to write more tonight. She would, eventually. There was space now. The envelope was thin. No return address, just her name printed neatly across the center. The handwriting was familiar in the way an old bruise remembers pressure. Curled loops, oddly childish, trying too hard to be elegant. Mildred didn't open it right away. She placed it on the table next to her tea and finished folding the laundry first. Then she wiped down the counter, watered the plant in the kitchen window, and straightened the dish towel hanging on the oven handle. Only then did she return to the envelope. She slit the top with the edge of a butter knife and pulled out a single page. The paper smelled faintly of jasmine and something synthetic. It began, "Mildred, I'm sorry if things got out of hand. This isn't what any of us wanted." She read it once. That was all it needed. There were no apologies, just emotional choreography. No real ownership. Only phrases like misunderstood, caught in the middle. I felt attacked, and you made your point. Not once did it say I was wrong. Mildred folded the letter neatly, stood, and walked it to the fireplace. The logs were already smoldering from the morning chill she'd taken out of the room. She slid the letter in, watched the edges curl, blacken, then lift in slow wisps. It didn't sizzle, it didn't protest. It disappeared. Kelsey arrived just after 3, the sketchbook tucked under her arm again, her backpack sagging on one shoulder. She left a note, she said, pulling off her shoes. Said she hoped you'd cool off soon. Mildred raised an eyebrow. Is that what this is? Me being hot? Kelsey hesitated, then shrugged with a guilty half-smile. She's trying, her version of it. Mildred turned back to the fireplace, poker in hand, nudging the logs until the ashes settled into themselves. I'm not angry, she said calmly. I'm free. Kelsey didn't reply, but she didn't argue either. They sat together on the floor for a bit, back against the sofa, the room quiet except for the occasional creak of the settling house. Kelsey started sketching again. This time it was the mantel, the grain of the wood, the angles of the stonework. The drawing came together slowly, measured, unhurried, like the woman who sat beside her. 2 days later, a delivery truck rolled up the driveway just before noon. The men in navy polos stepped out and began pulling something from the back with practiced care. Evelyn was already in the driveway, arms crossed and grinning like she'd just pulled off a heist. What did you do? Mildred asked, stepping out onto the porch in her robe. I bought you a piano, Evelyn said, handing her the receipt. Used? Tuned. Yours. I don't play. You did, Evelyn countered. I remember. That sad little upright in your basement back when we were 25 and thought casseroles could solve anything. Mildred stared as the delivery crew wheeled the upright into the living room, its polished walnut case catching the afternoon light. The space they'd rearranged was suddenly fuller, but not crowded, as if the room had known it needed a heartbeat. So what's the occasion? Mildred asked. Evelyn's expression softened. Because I want you to have music again. You've reclaimed the house, the deed, the silence. Now reclaim the harmony. Mildred smiled, but didn't say thank you. Not yet. Her throat was full in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. That night, after the dishes were done and Kelsey had been picked up, Mildred lit 2 candles, poured herself a glass of red wine, and sat at the piano bench. The keys were warm from the sunlight that had landed there all day. She placed her fingers on the ivory, hesitating only a moment before pressing down. Middle C, her hands remembered. Clunky at first, then slow and deliberate, like stretching muscles that hadn't been used in years. She played a simple progression, then a second, then something that sounded like a melody trying to find its way back to her. The house didn't feel big. It felt balanced. She didn't play for long, just enough to let the sound reach the corners of the home that had once held arguments, slammed doors, quiet judgments. Tonight, they held chords. She closed the lid gently when she was done, set her wine glass on the mantel, and returned to her journal. She opened to the next page, paused, and wrote. I didn't need her to say it. I just needed to stop waiting. She underlined that too. It wasn't a grand reunion. It wasn't even a phone call. It was Kelsey's knock, 2 short raps, then the quiet creak of the door as she let herself in, and a soft, Grandma. Mildred glanced at the clock, 4:13, slightly earlier than usual. In the kitchen, she called back. Kelsey rounded the corner, her backpack thudding to the floor as she entered. You said if I ever wanted to make pasta from scratch. I did, Mildred said, already tying her apron. And I meant it. Kelsey grinned, pulled her hair into a ponytail, and reached for the flour tin. They didn't speak for a while, just measured, mixed, kneaded. The dough was stubborn at first, dry at the edges, but they worked it together on the counter until it smoothed under their hands like silk, warmed by touch. Kelsey's laughter came easily now. Floured and full, the kitchen windows were fogged with steam from the simmering sauce on the stove. It was a good hour before Kelsey said anything that didn't involve measurements. I told Dad, she said quietly, rolling out a sheet of dough, that he let her do it. Mildred didn't ask what it was. She didn't need to. Kelsey kept her eyes on the rolling pin. I said he let her talk to you that way, that he didn't stop her, that he just stood there like it wasn't his business." "And what did he say?" Kelsey shook her head. "Nothing. He just blinked, then told me to finish my homework." Mildred's hand stilled over the pasta cutter. "You told the truth," she said. "That's more than most people do." Kelsey looked up then. Her expression was too old for 12, but somehow still hopeful. Still reaching for a softness that hadn't abandoned her. "I didn't say it to hurt him," she said. "I said it because I didn't want to be like him." Mildred stepped around the counter and gently brushed a smear of flour from Kelsey's cheek. "I know." Later, after the pasta had been cut, boiled, and eaten, too quickly, as good food always is, Kelsey opened her backpack and pulled out a notebook. She hesitated before handing it over. "It's for school," she said. "An essay. Themes, courage." Mildred adjusted her glasses and took the notebook with care, like it contained more than lined paper. She read slowly. The writing was raw, unpolished, but honest. Kelsey described how it felt to watch people she loved become people she didn't recognize. She wrote about fear, not the kind that came with monsters under the bed, but the kind that came when adults looked the other way. She wrote about speaking up anyway. Mildred looked up after the last sentence. "You wrote this?" Kelsey nodded, suddenly shy. "This is brave," Mildred said, "and real." Kelsey let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. "Can you help me fix the grammar and stuff?" "With tea and grace," Mildred replied, already reaching for the kettle. They sat on the sofa together, the piano quiet in the corner, the lamp casting a soft circle of light over them. Mildred made only a few changes, small things, a repeated word, a comma that wanted a period. But she left the ending untouched. Courage doesn't always win the room. Sometimes it just opens the door and decides not to leave. After Kelsey left that evening, Mildred walked to the front door and stood there a moment, her hand resting on the knob. She didn't lock it. She didn't need to. Let the door stay open for the right ones, for the ones who didn't mistake her silence for weakness or her boundaries for a wall. Upstairs, the bed was made. The piano sat polished and waiting. In her journal, a new page waited for her to claim it, but not yet. Tonight, the house didn't need a single word. It just needed a woman who knew the difference between being kind and being taken for granted. It was done. The trust was finalized, notarized, and bulletproof. The house, the one her father had left her, the one she had once nearly handed over by way of silence and accommodation, was now irrevocably hers. No one could contest it. No one could rewrite its story, not even in 30 years. Samuel stood in her sunlit foyer, the new folder tucked neatly beneath his arm, glasses perched low on his nose. "You've sealed the door, Mildred," he said, with the ghost of a smile. She took the folder, ran her fingers along its edge like she was feeling the weight of every decision inside it. "And painted it my color," she replied, voice steady. Samuel nodded once, respectfully. "It's a good color." 3 days later, Mildred hosted her first brunch since the eviction. No family, just neighbors, friends, people who'd asked gently and shown up kindly through the quiet storm. Evelyn arrived first, naturally, with a quiche, a floral apron already tied over her blouse, and a 6-pack of blood orange spritzers she referred to as liquid diplomacy. The kitchen smelled of rosemary, warm pastry, and fresh squeezed citrus. Mildred had ironed the tablecloth the night before and used the good china without ceremony. The piano sat in the corner like a polite guest. Even the hallway seemed to hum with quiet anticipation. By noon, the house was full of easy laughter and second helpings. Mr. Harper from across the street asked for Mildred's scone recipe. The Coopers brought their toddler, who immediately tried to eat a napkin. A woman Mildred had only waved to in passing for years stayed for 2 hours and left her phone number on a sticky note that said, "Let's trade garden cuttings." No one asked where Greg was. No one asked if the family would return. No one needed to. After dishes were cleared and coffee was poured, someone nudged the piano bench. "Doesn't your granddaughter play?" Evelyn said, looking pointedly at Kelsey. Kelsey hesitated, suddenly flushed and unsure. "She plays beautifully," Mildred said, gently but firmly, "but only if she wants to." Kelsey blinked at her grandmother, then gave a small nod. She walked over, smoothed her dress beneath her as she sat, and lifted the fallboard. The first notes were shy, like they were checking to see if they were welcome. But by the second stanza, her hands had found the flow, a simple melody, soft and clean, carried by memory more than training. The room quieted, spoons stilled mid-stir, and a toddler tilted her head as though she understood the gravity of sound. When Kelsey finished, the applause wasn't thunderous, it was warm, lasting, real. "Encore," someone called. Kelsey looked at Mildred, who just smiled and gave the smallest nod. She played again, and this time she didn't hesitate. That evening, after everyone had gone and the house had returned to its softer rhythm, Mildred walked into her office carrying a frame. It wasn't ornate, just walnut, matted, clean-lined. Inside it, the original deed. Her name in ink that hadn't faded. Her father's signature, the stamped seal of county authority. Something irrefutable, unshakable, and hers. She hung it above the small writing desk where she kept her journals. No spotlight, no label, just placement, deliberate. The document that so many had dismissed, ignored, tried to talk over, it now lived in a place of visibility. Not pride, exactly, just proof. That she'd been right to hold the line, that she'd been right to keep the house, that there are some hands a house never leaves. The message came in just after 9, not a letter this time, a text. Blue bubble, no punctuation, no salutation. Just 5 words. "Can we talk? Just us." Mildred read it once, then put her phone down without responding. She didn't delete it, she didn't block the number, she just let it sit, like a balloon deflating slowly in the corner of a room, long since cleaned for better things. There was a time she would have answered, would have told herself grace meant listening, would have convinced herself that silence was a missed opportunity instead of a boundary. That time had passed. She had no point to prove. Instead, she sent Kelsey a package that arrived the next day. Inside was a soft leather roll of sketching pencils, graphite, charcoal, pastels, and a short note in her careful, looping handwriting. "Use every shade. Even the dark ones help shape the light." Grandma that night, Kelsey texted a photo of a half-done sketch. It was the piano, mid-light, mid-shadow, keys catching the soft gold of sunset. Mildred replied with a heart. Nothing more. The art said enough. Evelyn dropped by on Saturday morning with bakery croissants and the kind of exhaustion only semi-retirement could deliver. They sat on the garden bench with steaming mugs, surrounded by new blooms and freshly weeded beds. The birdhouse swung gently in the breeze, and the soil still held the scent of last week's rain. "You've rebuilt," Evelyn said, sipping. "So, how's it feel?" Mildred leaned back, eyes scanning the garden, the windows, the lines of her house, how they belonged to her again. Not because someone gave them back, but because she took them without apology. Like I'm no longer a guest in my own story. Evelyn raised her mug in a slow, silent toast, then took another bite of croissant, as if the answer had settled something even she hadn't realized was unsettled. A hummingbird appeared then, flitting just above the lavender bush. Its wings beat fast enough to blur, but its movements were precise, small, sure, self-contained. It hovered for half a second before disappearing like punctuation at the end of a sentence that didn't need to be rewritten. They watched it go in silence. "You think she'll try again?" Evelyn asked after a while. "She already did," Mildred said, setting her mug down on the arm of the bench. "In her way." "And?" Mildred smiled faintly. "I let it go." "No reply?" "No echo," she corrected. That evening, the light slanted just right across the hardwood, stretching long fingers into the living room and touching the edge of the piano, the corner of the framed deed, the spot on the bookshelf where Kelsey's latest sketch now rested. A small still life of a vase, a hand, and a window. Mildred sat at her desk, journal open in front of her, the same one she'd started in quiet fury months ago. There were only a few pages left. She flipped past entries marked with growth, with grief, with small victories that felt enormous in real time. Past the lemon cookie recipe scrawled in the margin. Past a quote Evelyn had once said, and she'd loved too much to forget. She turned to a clean page, picked up her pen, wrote slowly. This house remembers who fought for it. She underlined it once, then closed the book. Not because she was done, but because the house was listening, and it already knew the rest. The hallway had never been much to look at, just a stretch of beige wall between the entryway and the living room, punctuated by light switches and a thermostat. But now it had something else. A single frame, hung at eye level, lit softly by a new sconce Evelyn had insisted on ordering. Inside the frame, Kelsey's certificate from the state essay competition. Honorable mention, Youth Division. Courage in Unseen Places. Mildred had matted it in pale ivory and framed it in the same walnut as the deed in her office. Same dignity, same care. She stepped back, arms folded, and looked at it like she was reading a chapter ending. The house smelled like warm bread and basil. A fresh loaf was cooling on the rack. The kitchen window cracked just enough to let in the bite of late spring. In the garden, time had overtaken its bed, and the hummingbirds had returned for the season. Evelyn leaned in the doorway behind her, sipping coffee from the mug she never remembered to return. Think they'll ever come back? Mildred didn't hesitate. Only if they knock. Evelyn let out a single amused huff. Fair. They stood in silence for a moment. Two women in a house that now held only what was wanted. Nothing more, nothing less. Later, while Evelyn loaded her leftovers into the car and the birds picked at the new feeder Mildred had hung on the trellis, she pulled out the old doormat and replaced it with the one she'd been saving. Earn this. Not welcome. Not home sweet home. Just 3 words. She stepped back, wiped her hands on her apron, and nodded once. Let them read it if they ever found themselves at her door again. Let them feel the weight of it. That afternoon, as the sun tipped west, Mildred sat at the small writing desk, where her journal now lived beneath the framed deed. A stack of mail waited beside her cup of tea. She opened it slowly, methodically, a habit, not a rush. One envelope was from Samuel. Inside, a single page, printed in his calm, formal tone. Final confirmation. No legal challenges submitted. No claims of tenancy or ownership. The trust holds firm. The house is yours. Fully, finally. Beneath it, a handwritten postscript. The best kind of victory is one that keeps its shoes clean. S. Mildred smiled and folded the letter in thirds, sliding it into her desk drawer. She picked up her cup of tea and took a slow sip, letting the quiet settle around her like old lace. Upstairs, the linens were freshly washed. The hallway was calm. The walls held nothing they hadn't earned. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt finished, whole. The piano sat quiet in the next room, and the garden swayed under the breath of an easy wind. Somewhere, a child laughed in the distance. A bike, maybe, or a game played without supervision or shame. Mildred looked out the window, then back to the hallway, her eyes drifting one last time to the framed certificate. A generation had learned from what she hadn't said. She set down her cup, opened her journal, picked up her pen, and wrote, "My daughter-in-law screamed at me in front of everyone, calling me worthless. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the documents that proved whose name was on the house." She capped the pen. She closed the journal, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to underline a thing.